So earlier this month, I was given the opportunity to play an early copy of Veilguard from start to finish. I do suspect this video is going to be passed around to people outside my normal audience, so a very quick introduction. Hi, I'm Katie. I'm a Dragon Age lore YouTuber that was picked up by BioWare a few years ago to be on their community council, which was just basically a focus group made up of people who are very familiar with the series as a whole. For the most part, we really only knew Act 1 of the game and a very small amount beyond, so more than half the game has been a surprise to me as well. Now, to start, to get the big question out of the way, did I like it? Yes, I loved it. Without going into the specific details as to why, the best way to explain my feelings is that this whole channel started with me not being able to sleep. I played through the series and I read all the novels and the comics, and I just loved it so much that I just couldn't get it out of my head. It just wouldn't leave me alone. So I wrote and recorded and uploaded, and here we are today. And so now, the most glowing review I could honestly give without going into much more detail is that I can't sleep again. I'm back to having trouble sleeping because there is so much I want to explore and discover and talk about. Now, I've been doing YouTube for a number of years now, and while I'm always a little nervous about uploading videos, there's just something about this one that has me actively anxious. There are a lot of eyes on me for what I'm going to say, and I can't help but feel that if you don't agree with me, I'm going to have let you down. But I also can't help that this is just something that I love, and I want to acknowledge that bias. Veilguard isn't perfect, but that doesn't change the fact that I still love it. I can see the issues it has, and still have felt moved by it all, much like the other games that have come before it. Now, from here on out, while I won't be giving story spoilers, I will be going into more details about some mechanics and the overall structure of the game, including some cons I found and maybe some mood spoilers. If this is something you want to find out yourself, I would dip out now. Now, I'm going to break this down into categories to kind of help me organize my thoughts on this. Gameplay. If you are looking for a detailed review on how the game is handled, I deeply apologize, but this is not the review for you. I was desperate to know the story, so as of right now, I have only played on the easiest difficulty, which was a bit comical as some boss fights were counted in the seconds rather than the minutes. There were a few times that I was pulling my punches so I could just hear the dialogue that the boss was shouting, and I ended up accidentally defeating an optional boss in the early game despite being level 50, and obviously being designed for late game, which resulted in some codex entries not making sense until later. Now, I explain this to also explain how long the game took me. Steam tells me that I'm just a bit shy of 60 hours for one playthrough of Veilguard, with me doing a lot, but not all of the side quests and all of the companions and obviously all of the main quest. In a brief overview I was given of the game with the press kit, we were told that the main quest took about 40 hours, which I guess I could believe, but I did feel like I did way more than 20 hours of side content. I'm thinking that maybe the 40 hours would also include the companion quests, or they just did not factor in playing on easy mode. Now, let me tell you though, I recorded all the major stuff for future use, and I was recording in 1080p because that's just what I upload to YouTube because I'm a scrub, and my new 2TB hard drive is weeping and bursting at the seams. Now, I know the lack of controlling companions is an issue to some people. Frankly, I'm just not one of them. Sorry. There's a good number of explorable areas too that I find are much improved from Inquisition's Empty Wastelands, which was a great change of pace. Now, I wouldn't call this gameplay per se, but I also don't know where else to put it in this review. Probably my one annoyance with the game as a game, I suppose, was that I just wasn't a big fan of the armors. Granted, I only unlocked maybe half of my choices, but I wish there were more armors that showed some skin to show off the body tattoos, or even a sort of golden nug so that I could import armors I did unlock to future saves. There are a lot of really interesting looking ones, just none of them felt right for the rook I made. Now, I did find some weapons I quite enjoyed though, which is funny because usually it's the opposite in Dragon Age games for me, but whatever. One new addition to the game that I liked for a first playthrough, but will be turning off in my second, is that there are tips that let you know that you just made a choice that will impact something else in the game. From a content creator standpoint, this is nice to help me remember what choices I need to pay attention to, but I can see people not liking this as well. Honestly, for the most part, the game is very clear on when you are about to do something that will shut off other options and what you need to do. As long as you are actually reading the prompts, I would say it's easy to not accidentally romance or pick something you hate. Mostly. There is one choice right now that isn't well telegraphed, but apparently from behind the scenes they're trying to work on that, so maybe that gets changed for relaunch. I don't know. But even the end of Act 2 is actually signified with a giant "This is the point of no return" screen to make sure you don't hit endgame before wrapping up things that you wanted to. This game really tries to make sure you're not doing things accidentally. Romance. So for my run, I romanced Emmerich, my darling little necromancer nerd. I went into the romance actually doubting myself. I initially chose this path because of his one romantic line in his short story that was just so unabashedly full of yearning. I just had to see what his deal was. But with all the fandom hype around other characters, I had wonder if I had kind of chosen a lame one. Maybe I won't like it, maybe I'll end up moving to another for a canon, and while that could still be true as I have not played the other romance routes, I am pleased to announce that we are God's favorite. The Emmerich-mancers, we won. I love his roots so much. It was so cute and sweet, and honestly, the end of his arc really moved me, and I know it's not going to hit everyone like it hit me. I think if you follow me for a while and know even a fraction of my personal life, I think you will find out why I find it so endearing, and that I can't see any of the other romances capturing me in this way. Now, I will say the Soulless romance path from Inquisition is still my favorite by far. That path was just the perfect storm for a lot of people, myself included, and I'm not sure if Veilguard has something like that again, but again, I've only played one and heard about 2 others. I'm largely in the dark about the romances. Speaking of Soulless, I know the Soulless Mancers are beating at my door asking me how I felt about the Solvellan content as a diehard Solvellan myself. I think the first answer is going to be there could have always been more Solvellan content. Now, I think there's a ton of Soulless content, and I quite enjoyed all of that, but there were times I wish there was just a little bone thrown. Now, however, because I know that was a scary thing to hear, when it really mattered, I felt fulfilled. I know Trick, Soulless's writer, has expressed their worries over sticking the Soulless landing, and at least to me, I think they did it. And here, Solvellans, I want to take you aside personally. From one to another, I need you to take this advice seriously. Do not rush. Explore. You have waited this long to find the end. Do not ruin this moment for yourself because you could not wait. You will want to remember this. Story and companions. This is the section I'm struggling with the most because it's hard not to go into specifics, but I'm doing my best. First, I actually want to start with what Veilguard misses the mark on. First, there are parts to the story that needed more time in a way that almost reminds me of Dragon Age 2. Again, this isn't new to the series. Even in Inquisition, there are parts that I wish were longer and more explored. I'm looking at you, Mage Templar War. But what makes it bad in Veilguard is that there is so much promise. And the small taste that I got from behind the scenes, I know it's likely that things were just cut for budget reasons. While the Codex does actually help a lot with filling in the gaps, there are a lot of questions I still have that I don't think should be questions. Granted, I am missing about 20% of the Codex, so maybe that's on me for missing them, but for some of the things, I don't think they should be answered in a missable Codex. I know this is going to bother a lot of people. It's been bothering me. But I also know some of you might not even notice what I mean, which makes this point both scary to talk about and important to bring up, in my opinion. Now, the other tick against Veilguard is coming back to the lack of world state choices. Now, I know a bunch of people are worried about parts of the game that invalidate their world state, and I do think the writers did a good job not doing that. However, I can't help but feel the sting of missed opportunities, even in Codex entries. I wish that some characters were brought up again, even in passing. In this huge, world-altering event, I wish I could know what Hawk and the Warden are up to. And I understand that there is a bit of fun there for people who like to come up with their own scenario, so I know this isn't going to be a big deal for everyone, but I found myself wishing I knew certain things. Now let's move on to the positives. One of my biggest complaints about Inquisition was that Corypheus, after his kick-ass introduction, fell flat. I can say that this was not the case with these villains. Now, some of the companion arc villains do get a little silly. I found them more fun and wasn't really bothered by them. The main villains, though, I thoroughly enjoyed. The boss fights were also super fun, and even with me playing on super easy mode, I was enjoying the animations and dialogue. They are scary and imposing, and also people, and that right there is very Dragon Age to me. Another Inquisition pet peeve of mine was that you become too all-powerful too fast. Corypheus had one win as a villain, and then you just constantly beat his ass into submission. There doesn't feel like any stakes that you could lose to him. In Veilguard, you honestly feel that you are up against gods. You don't know how you are going to beat them. Meanwhile, the explanation of winning also feels satisfactory and makes sense within the story and the lore of Dragon Age. From what we have gathered in the past about the villains of this game, this is a wonderful interpretation of them. Now, moving on to the companions, I think these are all great additions to the Dragon Age series. I loved all of their arcs, with my only complaint really being, again, some needed more time to stretch its legs. But the writing is there, and I'm excited to see so many of you see the relationship between these characters. The overall story as a whole is just really hard to talk about without spoilers, to be honest. Yeah. Many of the devs have mentioned that regret is a big theme, and it sure is. It sure is. But along with that is the secret theme of what I'm going to call hope. I would love to expand on that, but again, I don't think I could say anything meaningful at this time. But here is where I also want to talk about Rook. Now, Rook as a character has gone through a lot of changes in the background. I used to actively hate Rook so much. So seeing the character turn into something I actually enjoyed playing was a welcome surprise for me. I feel like I can't accurately speak on the choices in the dialogue wheel, as I just have never clicked with a complaint that is too restrictive in any of the Dragon Age games. I understand a lot of people disagree with me. That's just not something that I've really felt. While I can't say that I connected to the Rook I made, I feel like that was because of some choices I made that gave me that disconnect, like forcing myself to play a character I had come up with ages ago rather than what called to me in the moment, so I am curious how others will react to theirs. An end. One final bit I want to touch on. We know from interviews that this is not the last Dragon Age game. I want to be very clear on that. However, Veilguard feels like a love letter and a goodbye. It feels like the closing out on a chapter of Thetis that we have fallen in love with so far, and while it makes moves to start a new chapter, both in characters and plot, I can't help but have this overwhelming feeling of bittersweet relief. Relief that I got an ending that I'm happy with. Relief that the game I wanted to play for so long was one that I enjoyed. But sad that the world I've grown so attached to is closing on a chapter I loved. There is excitement at the possibilities and fear that maybe I won't enjoy the next part. Unlike past Dragon Age games, when I hit the credits, it felt like the end of a good book that has no sequel. There is a hole in your chest where that world used to be. When playing through the series for the first time 10 years ago, each of the games hit me in a sore spot. A friendship that has soured from betrayal, best friends that have to scatter to the winds to survive, a lover hurt by forces you can't really control. I'm a therapist by trade, and I had a mentor sit me down one day to express her worry that I bottle my real feelings to not seem as bothersome. I couldn't have told you this in the moment, but these silly little games helped me work through those emotions in a way that I found comfortable. And it wasn't until later, when thinking of those things hurt me less, that I realized why. And so I bring this all up to say that it somehow happened again with Veilguard. A loss I felt responsible for. And I play other games and somehow don't have these things happen to me with them, but somehow the Dragon Age writing team just has my number and knows how to set a bone I didn't know was broken. So when people ask me how I like Veilguard, how can I be partial? How can I put a number on a game that felt like a reassurance? The best I can say is that I know Veilguard isn't perfect, but it was perfect for me.